Good morning, Year 3. So today I'm feeling a little bit tired, a little bit, I don't know, I feel like I'm not in the best mood today. I'm feeling a little bit low, a little bit blue, some of you might say. And I think that's probably because we've been in quarantine for quite a long time. I miss seeing some of my friends, and I feel that I've been working very hard, doing lots of lessons and preparing for you guys, and sometimes that makes me feel a little bit low energy. If you're listening to what I'm saying and you can understand how I'm feeling, and you can actually imagine what it feels like to be me right now, that means you might have a skill called empathy. Now, Mr. Kerbal has spoken a little bit about empathy in some of our assemblies this year. If you think all the way back to last term and the term before, we spoke about empathy. And what you might not know is that empathy is very important for reading. So empathy helps you to develop good relationships with people. That means having good friendships, being a good child to your parents or to your guardians, and all types of other relationships, even with your teachers. But it also is very important in reading, because when we're reading, books contain a lot of information about what people are thinking and what they're feeling. And in order to really understand a book and to understand a character, we need to be able to imagine what it's like to be feeling what they're feeling and thinking what they're thinking. And that is called empathy. So I want you to really focus on your empathy today. Try to think about how you might feel in the same situation as those characters, and try to think about what it's like to be someone who's not you, just for the day, and see if it helps you in answering these questions. Even though I'm not feeling that great, I am excited to be doing this lesson because, as you know, I'm really enjoying this book and I really like this chapter. I think it's a really interesting interaction between Evie and Professor Abigail Garcia that we're going to look at. So I'm going to be positive and I'm going to smile so we can carry on with the lesson and not all be too sad today. Okay, so before we go on to the book, let's do our pre-lesson checklist. Make sure you have a pencil and paper ready. First thing, make sure you've read until the end of chapter 7 of Evie in the Jungle. I think everyone should have read to the end of chapter 7 because that was the same thing that we needed to do for the last comprehension lesson. And if you're in Jade or Indigo group, I forgot to write this on the checklist, but you're doing Mr. Goodall's video again, you're carrying on with your story, so you can go now, bye-bye, and do his video. And everybody else, you should be with me if you're not in the Jade or the Indigo group. And you should write today's LI, which is at the bottom there. The date is the 7th of May 2020, and the LI is to suggest how a character might be feeling or why they chose to act in particular ways. So pause the video now and write that down. If you're still watching, I'm hoping you've already got your date and LI down, which means we can start the lesson. As I said before, we're going to be carrying on with comprehension today. First, let's recap what are the 3 types of comprehension questions that we already know. I know prediction, so that's saying what's going to happen next. I know retrieval, which is the questions that are mainly based on facts that you can find really obviously in the text. And then there's inference. Remember that inference questions aren't always easy to answer. You can't just find the answer by looking quickly through the text to find it. You actually need to think about what's happening in the story. Sometimes you might need to base your answer off certain clues. So the answer won't be given to you in plain English. There might be a clue that could help you to arrive at the answer. That clue is called the evidence from the text. And when you give an answer based on looking at evidence from the text, that is called a deduction. These are all terms you should have heard before in our last few weeks of comprehension lessons. Most of the inference questions that we've practiced so far rely on our skills of deduction. So all you've had to do is to find the evidence in the text that could help you to arrive at your answer. Sometimes you can't answer a question just by using deduction. Sometimes you need more than just looking at the evidence in the story to arrive at your answer. The types of questions that ask us about characters, about how they're feeling, what they're thinking, and why they might choose to do something in a story, require us to use that skill of deduction, plus they need to use a skill of empathy, which means being able to understand why someone might feel a certain way or why they might choose to do something. For example, if in a story you read a passage where a character was crying and you looked at the text and you saw that just before the character started crying, they went on a roller coaster. It might not make sense that a roller coaster would make the character cry. So if you just looked at the evidence, if you only used your deduction, you wouldn't really understand why the character was crying, because what does roller coasters have to do with crying? It doesn't really make logical sense. But if you have some empathy, and you think about the fact that the character's only 5 years old, and they're all on their own, and they've never been on a roller coaster before, you could probably guess, or make an informed guess, that the character's probably crying because they're scared of the roller coaster, because it's their first time, or because they're so little, or because, maybe they're afraid of heights or of going really, really, really fast. So in this example, if you didn't have any empathy, you would struggle to answer the question. The only thing that enabled you to answer the question would have been if you had thought really carefully about who is the character and how might they feel. If you were them, how would you feel? I think it's hard to describe these types of inference questions that require empathy until we do a few examples. So in a minute, we're going to have a look at the text, and I'm going to show you some examples of these tricky inference questions, and I'm going to explain to you how I use my own empathy to help me answer those questions. The part of the text we're going to look at is just carrying on from where we left off last week. So hopefully you remember, not last week, last lesson. Hopefully you'll remember that we were in the middle of chapter 7 and Evie had just walked into the office where Professor Abigail Garcia was, in the International Centre for the Protection of the Rainforest. I think that's what it's called, or rainforest animals maybe. So we're going to look at that scene just when Evie walks in and Professor Abigail Garcia is on the phone. Remember what the office looks like. It's in this tiny hut on the bank of the Amazon River, and Evie had to cross this rickety bridge to get there. And the office is very small, and it's humid and sticky, and it's a little bit messy because there's paperwork everywhere, and Abigail Garcia looks very busy. The bit that we were at is when Evie has walked into the room, and she says, "A scarlet macaw," Evie said excitedly. And that's the bright red parrot with blue, green and yellow wings that you hopefully drew in your scene from your last comprehension questions. She tried to enter the macaw's head, but it turned out that parrots' heads, or this parrot at least, were filled with rude and angry thoughts that were hard to follow. "Shh," said her dad, pointing to a woman. Professor Abigail Garcia was on the phone. She was shouting in Spanish. Evie understood some of what she was saying. "No, they can't do it. We must keep going. We'll find the money." "I don't know how, but we will." I don't know. But we can't let the loggers take that land. We can't let them chop down a single rubber tree on that land. We just can't." So this is what Professor Abigail Garcia is saying on the phone. And my example question here, this is an inference with an empathy element question. It asks you, how do you think Professor Abigail Garcia is feeling when she is talking on the phone? How do you think? Now it says it's an inference question and it's asking us what we think, so it probably is an inference question. How do you think she's feeling when she's talking on the phone? It doesn't have any clues really about exactly how she was feeling. It doesn't really say that she was sad, so it's not a retrieval question. The answer's not obvious. What deductions can we make? Well, let's have a look for clues. Let's hunt. What can we look at about what she's doing and how she's talking? It says she was shouting. Now that is some evidence that tells me that maybe she's angry, because normally people shout when they're angry or upset. Then I can look at how she is talking. There's lots of exclamations. "No, they can't do it. We must keep going." These are all exclamations. So that is part of her shouting, and it also tells me that she's saying things very forcefully. She keeps saying, "I don't know." So that's another clue. I don't know, I don't know. How do you think someone's feeling if they say, "I don't know"? Maybe they're confused, for example. Then it says, but we can't let the loggers take that land. We can't let them chop down a single rubber tree on that land. Now this is the bit that requires some empathy. We have to understand who is the character of Professor Abigail Garcia and how would she feel in this situation. We know that she's on the phone talking to somebody saying that no, they can't do it. So someone's doing something that she doesn't want them to do. And she says we can't let the loggers take that land. Now loggers are the people that chop down rainforest in order to take the logs and sell them. So the logs from the trees. And she keeps saying we can't let them chop down a single rubber tree on that land. So it sounds like all these loggers are trying to cut down the trees and she's trying to stop them. I know from using my empathy skills that Professor Abigail Garcia really cares about the environment. So if I were her, if I was someone that cares so much about the rainforest that I even set up a whole centre dedicated to protecting it, how would I feel if I knew that loggers were going to come and chop down everything? Yes, I would definitely be angry. So I used my deduction, because I could see that she was shouting to show me that she was angry, but I also used my empathy to understand why she's angry. And I'm using my empathy to understand she's angry because some people are trying to destroy the rainforest and she cares a lot about it. So now I need to write that down in my answer. So when I give my answer to this question, I need to make sure that I explain my deduction, and I give that evidence from the text, but I also explain why she's feeling how she's feeling using my skills of empathy. So, I think that Professor Abigail Garcia is feeling angry. I'm going to say angry and frustrated when she is talking on the phone.
I think this because it says she was, let me put it in inverted commas because that's my bit from the story. She was shouting in Spanish.
I can even just say it says this because it says she was shouting. It doesn't matter what language it's in. The important thing is that she was shouting. And she was shouting and she uses lots of exclamations. That's another piece of evidence that I found from the text, another deduction.
I also think that she is feeling desperate or confused. I think this because it says, or she says, she keeps on saying, I don't know.
So that's what tells us that she's feeling desperate or confused because she can't think of an answer. I think she is feeling this way. So now I'm using my empathy.
Because she is talking about people trying to destroy the rainforest, which she cares about. And it sounds like she doesn't know how to stop them.
Or she doesn't have the money, it sounds like maybe. So this is quite a long answer, and it's quite important that for inference questions that rely on you using your empathy as well, that you give quite a long detailed answer to show how much you really understand that character and you understand the story. You won't always know because a question won't tell you when it's an empathy question or an inference plus empathy question, but a good tip is if the question's asking you about a character, like about how they feel or about what's the reason why they're thinking something or doing something, you probably do need to use your empathy because empathy is all about understanding how other people feel and think. So now it's time for you to have a go at answering these questions yourself, making sure that you give your examples from the text to support your answer and that you use your empathy to explore how the characters are feeling and why, and what the characters are doing and why. So here is your task for today. It just says answer these inference questions using deduction and empathy to arrive at your answer. So just like we've practiced, as they are inference questions, make sure you give reasons for your answers and support your responses with examples from the text. So just like we've been practicing with all types of inference questions, we need examples. Also, don't forget to write your answers in full sentences. Some people have been forgetting when they've been sending their work in. So you've already seen the example there. The 4 questions are: why is Evie's dad a little scared of Professor Abigail Garcia? How do you think Professor Abigail Garcia is feeling when Evie asks her to look after the sloth? Why does Professor Abigail Garcia stop talking in the middle of explaining about the website? And finally, a tricky one, how do you think Professor Abigail Garcia feels about Evie? All of the answers to this text can be deduced if you look at the second half of chapter 7 and use your empathy skills. So pause the video now to complete the task. Also, please keep sending your work into the Year 3 email. It's been so great to see what you've been up to, and it really cheers me up when I'm feeling down. So I look forward to having some new emails in my inbox at the end of the day. Bye!